I'd like now to introduce our first keynote speaker, Professor Philip Khoury. He's the Ford International Professor of History, and he's also Associate Provost at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Professor Khoury was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and he was educated at the Sidwell Friends School, the American University of Beirut, Trinity College, and Harvard University. He joined the MIT History faculty in 1981 and served as Dean of the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences between 1991 and 2006. He was appointed Associate Provost in 2006. As Associate Provost, he's responsible for overseeing MIT's non-curricular arts programs and initiatives. He's also responsible for overseeing their strategic planning for international education and research, their efforts to promote the public understanding of science and technology, and enhancing existing activities and new opportunities at the intersections of MIT's 5 schools. Professor Khoury is a political and social historian of the Middle East, and among his publications are Urban Notables and Arab Nationalism, and Syria and the French Mandate, which received the George Louis Beer Prize of the American Historical Association, among several other prominent texts. Professor Khoury is an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and an American Association for the Advancement of Science Fellow. He is past president of the Middle East Studies Association. Welcome, Professor Khoury.
I'd like to say I hardly recognize myself, but some of it was true. It's a pleasure, really, for me to be here today. This is my first visit ever to Cornell. I can't believe I haven't seen this beautiful campus university before, but I'm just grateful to be here. And I'm going to talk about university global strategies, and specifically MIT's global strategy. Frankly, leading research universities often have a difficult time defining clear international strategies for themselves at the university-wide level and sticking to those strategies for any length of time. We don't always have an easy time staying on mission when it comes to hewing to our stated global strategy, if we have one at all. One big reason why has to do with the reality that our leading universities are regularly bombarded, or at least distracted, by all sorts of foreign governments, universities, and foundations coming to our doorstep to dangle in front of us all sorts of goodies in return for our agreement to partner with them. This has often forced our institutions to be reactive rather than proactive when it comes to what we do globally. At least that was the case at MIT a decade ago, and some of my colleagues there would say it still is the case. MIT is 85% science, engineering, and management, and is packed with highly entrepreneurial faculty who never seem to shy away from accepting the next offer from some foreign government or university to partner. Such faculty have certainly launched some amazing undertakings over the years. Some have built veritable empires, but not always with the university's highest interests in mind. They rarely consider the potential opportunity cost to their colleagues or to the university at large when they accept a major new international undertaking. They live by the motto, act first, apologize later. We have struggled to constrain some of the most ambitious of our cowboys on the faculty, and we're finally beginning to do so. However, we are conscious of the reality that too much constraint could damage the bottom-up entrepreneurial faculty culture that has made MIT what it is today. It's a delicate balancing act. Now, what I want to concentrate on first this morning are some of the kinds of major international initiatives that our research universities seem to be engaging in around the globe. And I'm going to focus, and I apologize, mainly on the larger private research universities, because those are the ones I know best. And what do I mean by major international initiatives? Each of us has our own metrics for what is a major initiative. Metrics might be based on the length of the university's commitment to the project, or the number of faculty, students, and staff involved in it over its course, or the annual or total dollar amount of expenditure. At MIT, a typical major international project these days will run about 5 years and may be renewable at least once. It can involve anywhere from 10 to nearly 100 faculty during the course of the project, and typically a major project will generate between $5 and $10 million per year of expenditure for a 5 to 7 year period. A few are in the 10 to 50 million per year figure, and they can generate as much as $200 to $300 million of expenditure over the duration of a project. Leading U.S. research universities are today global brands, but they still have a much stronger local physical presence than a global one. We still mainly reside here in Ithaca or in Cambridge or Palo Alto or wherever you're coming from. In this way, we are different from a number of major for-profit corporations that have both a global brand and a global presence. You think of Microsoft or Pepsi or IBM or McKinsey. Most research universities are located somewhere on a global presence spectrum. I don't think any of us just stays home, but some of us have only recently begun to dip our toes into the international waters in terms of launching major international projects, and we don't have much global presence yet. What we might have going is an office abroad in one or another city where we may have a large concentration of alumni and where we feel there's potential for growing up significant activity. These foreign offices are often labeled centers of one sort or another. Business schools tend to populate them. Harvard has several already in Santiago, Mumbai, Shanghai, and they're mainly, but not exclusively, Harvard Business School outposts. Further along the spectrum, if you can imagine this horizontal line, we find some universities beginning to dangle one or both of their feet into the international waters. Doing so might mean developing major collaborations with startup universities, but in which our name doesn't appear on the new university's marquee, or when it does appear, it is always in small letters underneath the university's name and only for a fixed period of time. These collaborations don't include our managing or administering these new universities or issuing joint degrees with our names on them. What I have just described might be called the MIT model. We undertake very large university-to-university collaborations, but without putting our name permanently on the door or our Bigelow on the floor, as the saying used to go, and I'll return to this model in a bit. Still further along the spectrum, we find some major research universities actually wading in the water. They do so by establishing branch campuses abroad, and they actually manage these campuses and issue their own university degrees on which their names appear in bold print. In this way, the American University's brand is directly associated with the branch campus. Education City in Qatar, in Doha, where Weill Cornell Medical, Northwestern, Carnegie Mellon, Georgetown, and other universities have branch campuses, is the most prominent example that I know of what I'm describing. Duke's emerging China campus in Kaohsiung, which is a ways away from Shanghai, is another example. And the Yale NUS College of Liberal Arts on the National University of Singapore campus might be considered another. At these branch campuses, local students will not necessarily be of the same quality or evaluated by the same criteria we use back on our home campuses. And therefore, these branches are differentiated from the home campuses in terms of the quality of the students and often of the faculty. Faculty rights and privileges are often different. For instance, academic tenure, as we know it, is often unavailable to the faculty who teach on these campuses unless, of course, they are faculty seconded from the American home campus for a brief period of time. Institutions this far along the spectrum often have faced at home faculty resistance to their creation. There has been considerable turmoil at Duke and Yale, for instance, where faculty have accused their university leaders of diminishing the university's brand or operating in countries where the political rights and freedoms of the local citizens are violated regularly. And they have accused their administrations of establishing these campuses without fully consulting their faculties. Another version of act first, apologize later. At the very end of the spectrum, there appears to be one university among us that is dipping its entire body into the international waters, almost as if it is undergoing baptismal rites. I refer to NYU, which is establishing a series of university campuses abroad under a single worldwide brand. The aim is to have a series of NYU campuses around the world that eventually will have a single faculty and student body of the same basic quality and achievement, and who are evaluated and admitted by a single set of criteria and who can move between these campuses in some seamless fashion. NYU has established NYU Abu Dhabi, NYU Shanghai, with this aim in mind. And there has been faculty backlash in Washington Square as a consequence of the NYU International Strategy, which is clearly a top-down strategy. Let me raise two different concerns about the American branch campus model or strategy. First, so far the university branch campuses in the Middle East, the one region I can speak about with some prior knowledge, they've not been able to attract enough qualified students from these countries where these branches are located, and this concerns the local governments in Doha and Abu Dhabi that are paying hundreds of millions, yes, even billions of dollars to support these campuses. If this continues, will the governments continue to lend their financial support, and what will be the consequences for the home universities that have these branch campuses? We're all watching. Second, it is the rare American research university that has been willing to create a branch campus in a poor country. Carnegie Mellon is an exception. It is already in Qatar, the wealthiest of the wealthy, and recently it has started up a branch campus in Rwanda exclusively for master's degree students. We're all going to be watching to see how it does and to see if any other universities follow CMU, and you may know of some that have and will tell us, and tell me certainly. Now, naturally, our American research universities aren't only helping to start up new universities or creating branch campuses around the world. Some of us already have very large, purely research-driven enterprises with partners abroad, and of course, all of us have scads of much smaller faculty-to-faculty or center-to-center partnerships abroad. We all send our students abroad for a junior semester or a junior year, or to do research or public service internships. The smaller the international collaboration, the less interested the university's central administration will be in knowing about it, provided it charges proper overhead and doesn't cause any embarrassment to the university. Of MIT's 260 research projects going on presently, they are supported, that is presently and supported by foreign funding. 195 of them have less than $1 million of expenditure per year. And we're not spending a lot of time. We know about them, but we don't spend a lot of time thinking about them. They're in the hands of the faculty principally, and we assume business as usual. That is not the case for our much larger projects, which are fewer but generate much more expenditure. MIT didn't just stumble into the international arena the other day. We've been teaching about the world almost since our beginnings in 1861. Like Cornell, MIT is a land-grant institution. It is a fully private institution defined around the industrial arts. How international are we today? 30% of the entire MIT student body of 11,000 are non-US citizens. 41% are graduate students among that. 62% of our postdocs are foreign-born. 41% of the MIT faculty are foreign-born. 15% of our 125,000 living alumni live abroad. That's 19,000 or so. About 35% of our undergraduates go abroad for some kind of intensive research or service experience to some 40 different countries. And about 20% of all sponsored research funding and gift money to MIT now comes from foreign sources, from abroad. And that's fairly significant. It's about $260 million in FY13. Over the past decade, foreign funding at MIT has increased by 3.5 times. And that number doesn't seem to be shrinking, especially given what's going on around the world and in Washington. These numbers suggest that MIT is becoming a global university, yet we have a rather small global presence. The only enterprise MIT manages anywhere abroad is a large research center in Singapore, funded solely by Singapore's National Research Foundation to the tune of several hundred millions of dollars over a decade, and it's focused on environmental sensing, urban mobility, infectious diseases, and biological systems. SMART, as it's called, is the anchor tenant of Singapore's CREATE, a National Research Foundation creation. It's a multi-university research emporium that also involves Berkeley, Cambridge, and the ETH in Switzerland, among others. Okay, does MIT have an international strategy? Whenever asked this question, I like to respond that our strategy is really a set of goals for which we have developed strategies that we are always refining to adjust and adjusting to reach these goals. And these goals are simple, and they're basically and my guess is many of your institutions share them. We want to address the world's most crucial challenges. That's one. We want to identify, attract, and collaborate with the world's top talent. Two. We want to provide our students with the knowledge and tools to become leaders for all walks of life, and we feel strongly that an international experience has to be part of that. And finally, fourthly, and most obviously, we need to find funding to support all of this. Now, the global challenges MIT is so deeply involved in, alternative energies, the environment, poverty alleviation, advanced manufacturing, megacities, healthcare, medical engineering, they're increasingly complex and messy challenges. And our peers are also deeply involved in many of these same global challenges, plus others we aren't involved in. They require not only innovative, multidisciplinary approaches, but also central coordination and resources to be successful. These big challenges increasingly require the university's leadership to organize large, university-wide research initiatives for which our faculty and students provide the innovation and entrepreneurship. And the success of our international initiatives depends on at least three requirements. First, there must be a strong intellectual fit with MIT's core values and principles. Second, they must have clear faculty leadership and commitment. And third, they must be of clear mutual benefit to our international partners and to ourselves. I can't emphasize this last point. If we aren't clear about what we will deliver to our international partners from the very start, spelled out in precise language and agreed to by our partners, the project will likely founder. If it founders, we may have a very difficult time rebuilding the confidence required for the partner country to re-engage with our institution in the future. And we're very conscious of setting expectations because we find that often our foreign partners, even if it's in writing, come back to us asking for more, and our capacity to give more is often very limited. So we struggle very hard to get that right. Now, MIT's global strategy began to take root actually in the late 1950s and has ever since been mainly focused on capacity building abroad. What we mainly do at the largest level, highest level, I don't mean highest intellectually necessarily, though the highest level and scale, what we mainly do is assist governments to start up research-oriented universities around the world. Governments want us to help them develop innovation economies through the buildup of their intellectual capital. And they see MIT as an attractive model because our success has been in bringing strong government and industry sponsorship to our campus to support the creation of research that drives the creation of new industries and, by extension, economic growth. MIT almost never agrees to undertake university startups abroad unless there is a complementary research agenda that we feel helps us to at least have the potential to generate new knowledge through the collaboration. What attracts us abroad is the opportunity to conduct research on topics that we can't always do back home. We can be credited with helping to have started up in the 60s and 70s ITA, the leading aeronautical engineering university in Brazil, the India Institute of Technology at Kanpur, BITS Pilani, generally recognized as the leading private engineering school in India, and the Aryamar University of Technology in Iran in the 60s, in the Shah's era, which today in its later form is known as Sharif University. It is the leading university in Iran, and it is at the heart of Iran's nuclear program. We have also helped to build up capacity in some older, more established universities around the world. Cairo University's College of Engineering is one example in which nearly 100 faculty in the late 70s were involved. And you may know that the British government paid us, MIT, $100 million with another $30 million from British industry to try to make Cambridge University, that's the University of Cambridge more properly, more entrepreneurial and innovative. And we started doing that in 1999. I don't think MIT did a whole lot to change the 800-year-old Cambridge. And not much is left to show of that collaboration, other than an undergraduate exchange program with Cambridge, which lasts. So not all of our major partnerships have borne fruit, and the nerve of us to think that we could change a truly great university, Cambridge. And I wasn't laughing about the 800, making fun of 800 years. It is one of the world's great research universities. But Gordon Brown, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, thought differently. He later became Prime Minister, you'll recall. Today, we are heavily involved in helping 3 new startup research universities in Abu Dhabi, Singapore, and Russia to develop. Let me restate here that MIT's international strategy flies below the radar in that we don't put our name or logo on these startup universities. Our model is the silent partner model, if you prefer. We don't do branch campuses abroad. In Abu Dhabi, we're in our 6th year, helping to develop the Masdar Institute of Science and Technology. It's a graduate degree granting university that is focused on energy and the environment. Second, we are collaborating with the Singapore University of Technology and Design, Singapore's 4th research university, just in its 3rd year of operation. And our most recent and risky collaboration is with another startup graduate university, the Skolkovo Institute of Technology, which is only in its 2nd year. Skolkovo is an hour from Moscow, and Mr. Putin has declared Skolkovo to be Russia's new Silicon Valley, or so he wishes. Skoltech is to be the main anchor in Skolkovo, much as Stanford is the main anchor in Silicon Valley. California dreaming, some would say. In general, these international university collaborations are for a fixed period of time and will eventually withdraw from each of them. None of these institutions is called MIT Russia or Singapore or Abu Dhabi. We do not issue MIT degrees at these institutions or anywhere else except on our campus. What do we deliver to these startup universities, and what do we get in return? Well, we develop a portion of the new curriculum for these schools and help the university to localize that curriculum. We help them select their faculty. We then bring these new faculty to MIT for a semester or a year where they shadow MIT professors in their fields, conduct research with these professors and their students before they move to the new university to begin their teaching. It's a Teach the Teachers program. We do not help them to admit their students. We never teach their students, not on their campuses. And if they come to us, it's more for show and tell than teaching. We advise them on how to select senior administrators, develop administrative offices for resource development, facilities planning, technology licensing. And though we didn't intend this to happen, and I think it's a good thing that we didn't intend it to happen, the 3 presidents of these 3 universities, each is a senior member of the MIT faculty, now on leave to jumpstart these schools. These presidents are part of our culture. They are helping to ensure, we hope, that these universities will capture some of the MIT DNA, which is what their governments are hoping as well. We conduct joint research on topics that are agreed upon as part of the collaboration contract, and they are deemed of high value to the country we're working in, but they also need to be of high value to us. In return, what do we get? Well, when we design a curriculum for one of these universities, we're also designing it for ourselves. The hardest kind of funding, I think any of you in academic administration will know, is to find curriculum development funding. And here these countries are supplying us with the opportunity to strengthen or develop new areas of our curriculum. In the case of the Singapore University, we're getting a brand new design curriculum between engineering and architecture, thanks to their investment. Secondly, these collaborations often include funds to start up a research center at MIT of mutual interest to MIT and our partners. Our Singapore project includes a new international design center on the MIT campus with a larger mirror center back on the Singapore University, Singapore SUTD campus. And third, MIT, and I think this is in some ways the most important thing, MIT is also able to conduct research and run experiments in these countries that we would not otherwise be able to do back in the United States. For instance, in Abu Dhabi, the Masdar Institute is the anchor tenant in a township called Masdar, which is being constructed as a carbon-neutral town of about 50,000 people. You couldn't imagine anything similar in the USA where we could run experiments on energy and the environment in that way. And of course, it is Abu Dhabi that is paying for it all. MIT wouldn't be in Abu Dhabi or Singapore or Russia if there weren't really vital research questions for MIT to tackle among the grand challenges we're all interested in pursuing and addressing. Fourth, I should add that MIT tries very hard to secure what I will call a premium for our major capacity building projects. Countries or governments that we feel can afford it are asked to fund not only the entire research and education project at full overhead, MIT overhead, but also to pay us unrestricted endowment or funds to rehab or build new facilities on our campus to ensure that our campus as a whole benefits from the collaboration, even if that part of campus that's benefiting doesn't have anything to do with the collaboration. And finally, it creates another opportunity to get our students abroad. We're now able to send increasingly our students to these 3 campuses, among many other places. Our goal is to get 85% of our undergraduates to have a significant international experience during their 4 years of undergraduate education. That's a noble goal. We're nowhere near getting there. I said it's about 35% today. It's come up a long ways. And we really hope that we can use these institutions a bit more to our benefit. Okay, now, it all sounds like MIT is a glorious place, and of course it is and all that. But I will tell you that this dramatic expansion into the international arena in the past 10 years has come with real growing pains and raised serious questions with our faculty. Our faculty first is concerned about the need to balance our activities overseas with our faculty's commitment to our own campus. They feel the faculty has no more bandwidth to undertake new major international initiatives. This is a real quandary for us because it is very unlikely that MIT will increase its faculty size any much more than we have in all the years that have gone by. Why do I say that? I joined the faculty in 1981. It was 1,000 strong then, and it is 1,000 strong today. We have not grown our faculty at all. We haven't shrunk it, we haven't grown it, and we're not going to. Second, you will notice that our largest international initiatives are with countries that can afford to do business with MIT. Our faculty is concerned that MIT should be more engaged in working on problems or challenges in poor countries than it's been. But where will we find the funding? Some of us would like to invoke the Robin Hood principle, by which we tax the rich to fund the poor that seek our assistance. The fact of the matter is that many of the grand challenges MIT and you are interested in tackling are found in poorer or developing countries, and the solutions to these problems are likely to be found there too. And so we want to be there, and not only partnering with the wealthy. We haven't figured out how to do that all that well. Third, we need to remain nimble in our ability to redeploy our resources in response to changing research opportunities and faculty priorities and to changing conditions the changing conditions in countries in which we're involved. Launching a major new international initiative is always complicated, but it's also exciting. Winding down a major initiative can be even more complicated and is usually a lot less exciting. We aren't good at all at winding down initiatives that are no longer all that successful. And finally, we are always concerned that we may run afoul of U.S. government policy in undertaking certain kinds of collaborations abroad, that Washington may accuse us of selling the crown jewels of science and technology to our rivals and for a farthing. Does MIT, which depends on the U.S. government for 1/3 of its annual operating budget, when I joined the faculty, it was about 65% federal funding. So it's dropped, but nonetheless, that's very significant. So far, should MIT have a foreign policy to start with? Should we hew to American foreign policy? So far, our answer is we always consult Washington when we undertake a major new initiative in a country where there may be genuine concerns about our national interest, Russia being one, China another. But we don't have a foreign policy, and I don't think we're likely to get one. Finally, what new strategic directions will MIT take on the international front in the years ahead? Let me mention 2 possibilities. One direction we have begun to discuss is the establishment of a global research network of like-minded institutions with a science and technology orientation. Perhaps these institutions would one day include new universities in Singapore, Russia, and elsewhere that we're helping to establish. And they certainly would include already well-established scientific and technical institutions around the world. One imagines Imperial College, yes, Cambridge, Delft, ETH, Munich, the Royal Institute in Stockholm, the École Polytechnique, the Technion, Tokyo, Tsinghua. We're thinking about this. If we really are ambitious, MIT could become the central node of this network. Or, more realistically, it could be a shared network with locations in today's and tomorrow's innovation hubs. Rather than build one-to-one partnerships in individual countries, which is what we mainly do today, we would then rather build a network of research partnerships across the globe that tackle one or more of the grand global challenges, whether in energy or environment or health and medical technology. So that's one approach we're exploring. A second, and I think we're actually doing it as I speak, has a lot to do with MIT's new activities in the world of online learning. For 12 years now, so we're not that new, MIT has provided the world with almost the entire MIT curriculum online for individual learners to sample on their own and independently of any MIT direction. 2,200 courses have been sampled by 100 million people throughout MIT, through MIT's open courseware, and at no cost. 70 million or more have done so from abroad. Open courseware, OCW, has been very much an international strategic initiative and perhaps MIT's best-known initiative beyond MIT of the last decade. Last year, we invited Harvard, our neighbor, to join us in a new digital learning partnership we're calling edX, a teaching and research initiative that is in some sense the next stage of OCW. Some 30 institutions have since joined edX, a not-for-profit incidentally, and nearly 100 online courses are being offered. Some 1.5 million students have registered for these courses, and something like 7% of them will have earned certificates for passing these courses. I can tell you the MIT courses are not easy courses, so it may give you a sense of what is out there. Again, the preponderance of registered students are abroad, and that's only going to grow. They're only going to grow in number. These courses will also be available to MIT students. Taking such online courses may free up our students to engage in more active learning experiences on our campuses by taking their bread and butter lecture courses online in the off hours. But they will also be able to do so while they are abroad, which will allow many more MIT students to be abroad, involved in various research activities, which is what we want, more hands-on learning and more research. And if we established a global network of research institutions, to go back to the first thrust, our students could spend some of their time at one or more of these institutions in the network addressing the global challenges they, more than anyone, want to find solutions for. So what are the takeaways? Very simple. I will suggest three. First, MIT's international strategy for the past 50 years or more has been in the realm of capacity building through university startups abroad. Today, that strategy is being pursued, some would say, almost with abandon. Second, MIT's strategy has been to stay under the radar internationally, and it is definitely a rather quiet, silent strategy. Some have said that by not creating branch campuses with the MIT name on it, we will end up with no MIT global legacy and will not be able to bask in the glamour of having our own campuses abroad. In other words, MIT won't be remembered for what it did in Abu Dhabi, Singapore, Russia, or anywhere else it goes, just as it hasn't really been all that well remembered for what it did in Brazil, India, and Iran 50 years ago, though perhaps in the case of Iran it's not such a bad thing. Depends where you sit. On the other hand, by not becoming locked into the management of branch campuses and dependent on a limited number of big international funding sources to keep these branch campuses afloat, MIT will have more freedom to shift its international focus when new opportunities arise than some of its peers, because we aren't locked into the management structures that some of our peers are. And finally, MIT will likely have to redirect its international strategy away from its current series of independent capacity-building initiatives in single countries, each focused on the specific needs of those countries, towards networks of like-minded research universities dedicated to tackling together some of the globe's great challenges, and doing so increasingly through the new digital technologies that enable learning and, yes, even research on a massive scale. That's where I think MIT is headed, and I imagine your institutions may be thinking along similar lines. I sure hope so, because we hardly want to be alone in trying to understand and traverse the rapidly changing global landscape for higher education and research. Thank you. Okay. So I'm told I can take your criticisms, comments, and questions in that order.
That's right. We have
right?
quite some time for questions, and there's a microphone right here if you wouldn't mind stepping up to the microphone so everyone can hear you. Mark, do you have a comment? We're gonna let everybody get some exercise here.
For your engaging comments. I just wanted to ask you, it appears to me from your comments that MIT has really not embraced the development agenda of working in developing countries. Can you tell me if I heard you correctly on that? And can you tell me if that is correct, why or why you haven't done that?
Yeah. No, it isn't correct. We do have a number of really interesting initiatives. Only one might be considered of scale, and that interestingly comes out of our economics department. It is called the JPAL, or the Jameel Poverty Action Lab. A Saudi alumnus funded this. It involves 2 or 3 of the world's greatest economists in development, in the development field, who started this up, and basically what they're doing is they've looked at the medical world and drug trials, and they've figured out some modeling that will allow them to do poverty program trials, much as one looks at drug trials, and how you can tweak poverty programs to be more successful at less cost and so on in the developing world. And they work largely in India and in Africa. They have not broken into China. They stay under the radar as well in order to be able to do the kind of field work they do. And it's very, very exciting. And we do, of course, some what would be called, I guess, alternative technologies for the developing world, or appropriate technologies. I don't know if we can use that term anymore. It may be offensive. But we do engage in that through our technology group that we have in that. But we have not, MIT is a peculiar animal. Maybe it isn't so peculiar. The big Ivies, the one next door, when it wants to I'm talking about Harvard, when it wants to undertake a new initiative, it pours serious funding into it by promising to either raise the money and provide it or use their endowment. At MIT, we provide small seed funds, and the argument historically has been, this is an entrepreneurial faculty. If, with a little seed, you will prove you're successful or not. And so our faculty are left to their own devices. Frankly, it is very hard. The ideal project is the $1 to $5 million project for, say, 5 years. It involves 10 to 12 faculty. Those work very well for us. But these large-scale projects are very top-down, and they require the administration to sort of make big decisions about, do we want to allocate faculty time in these directions? And the only people who knock on our door who have money are the wealthy. The poor come to us all the time, and I don't mean poor in a bad sense, but you know what I mean. The developing world are always at our door, but we have to reject so many of their proposals because we can't see how to scale it up. I noticed the Gates Foundation is a funder of this conference, or at least of your international center. I thought I saw Gates up there. We would love them to be, think about us. I did see Gates up there. Or maybe I confused it with that building you're building on campus.
There is a building down the hall.
Yeah.
They'll be present on in the panel later this morning.
But so, yes, we're very interested in it. Frankly, in the 60s, we did a lot more in the developing world than we're doing today. And it's a shame, because that's where we really want to be. I mean, honestly, that's where the action is. That's where the most exciting research, we think, is for our kind of faculty today.
Dean Porter?
Thank you so much for a very exciting and inspiring presentation this morning. Truly appreciated. You caught my attention with edX. We're also partners with edX. And the question that I have, maybe getting into the weeds a bit, I heard you say that students can get a certificate for passing those courses. Have you considered giving academic credit for your edX courses, and either for your own students or for others? That's such an important question for us to be wrestling with.
Yeah. So it's not our students, MIT students, who are getting the certificates. It's everyone else who can pass these courses. We are struggling with that issue, as I imagine all research universities have to face this. Do we want to issue credit? I think we're heading in that direction for our undergraduates, certainly. If we really believe that the massive undergraduates should have significant international experiences. And we are an expensive proposition, MIT, like Cornell. It costs a heck of a lot to go to MIT. We give enormous amounts of financial aid, but it's still, these are first-generation students for the most part. Engineering is the social mobility field, right? And MIT is laden with first-generation kids who don't have any money and are living, you know, on their wits, basically, and the monies we can give them. So I think we're heading in that direction, but we haven't taken the plunge yet. You know, will we issue degrees abroad? I doubt it. I mean, I think the faculty feel quite strongly about that. I mean, there are some dissidents, you know, who are willing to go, but yeah. And I don't know what Cornell is doing or others. Georgia Tech, of course, is going whole hog, from what I can tell, in having degree programs abroad online. I don't think we're going in that direction, not yet.
I know there's going to be a funding panel later, but you mentioned almost in passing that your federal funding had dropped in your faculty lifetime from 2/3 of the budget to 1/3
Correct.
of the budget. And obviously you're filling that in with international
To some extent.
resources. Well, maybe you could say where is the other money coming from? And I mean,
Yeah, I mean, we do have.
It's a kind of a startling
No, it's a
change.
good question. It is. It's at MIT. We wonder where the money's coming from, and will it come? So we don't make any money on undergraduate tuition. We lose money. I mean, frankly, so that's not a win for us, and nor do we want it to be a win. We feel very strongly about financial aid, need blind, and all that. So where MIT had to change its model was when we watched federal funding beginning to drop, and it didn't drop precipitously. It took a long time to get to 1/3 from 2/3. We began to do what the big Ivies have done for a much longer time, and that is think about fleecing our alumni. That is going after all these success stories. We had never really done much in the world of, you know, individual giving. We do very well with corporations. We probably get more funding from corporations than anyone, but it's still minuscule. I mean, it's a fifth or fourth, fifth, sixth of what we get from the feds. That's all changed, and corporations have had a lot of problems, and they are still driven by job shop. I mean, they want returns on investment, and they want to see it in, you know, momentarily, and we can't. We have to be very careful about doing that kind of research because it's not what we were put on earth, nor were you put on earth to do, frankly, or do well. So endowment has really been our salvation, and good investors have endowment, okay? I mean, you have to not just raise the money, but you have to steward it and invest it in ways. And the market has basically worked for us, except like all of us in 08, 09, we were hit. But still, most of us, many of us are back to where we were in 08, 09, and some have gone beyond, everyone but Harvard. Yeah.
You touched briefly on the kinds of problems that you get into with values with a school like NYU, which dives in. But it's an issue also for the below-the-radar kinds of things you're talking about in Abu Dhabi, in Singapore, in Russia, in China.
How about Saudi Arabia?
And Saudi Arabia. How do you deal with it?
Not well. So Saudi Arabia Singapore was the first breakthrough. We do an enormous amount of work in Singapore, and there was really tremendous faculty resistance. Resistance to the fact I can't chew chewing gum, which now I think you can chew, as long as you don't spit it out, you know, to the authoritarianism of the Singaporean government, to the way gays are treated in Singapore, et cetera, et cetera. And that got us to think about, do we have a foreign policy or should we have a foreign policy? So what we say to ourselves is, if the faculty feel that they can conduct work in a certain country and give some benefit of the kind that hew to the principles that we believe in and show some progress. So in Saudi Arabia, you know, it's a segregated society, men, women. With the exception of this little $20 billion enterprise off of Jeddah called KAUST, the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, which is an odd experiment. We'll see if it has any, you know, overflow into the rest of society. We work with the top engineering school, apart from the American University of Beirut, Rani, and Jose, in Saudi Arabia called the King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals. That university, the faculty are all males, the secretaries are all male, the staff is all male. There are no women employed at that university. And we asked ourselves, why are our colleagues talking about doing work with them? They offer certain problems or challenges that we're very interested in intellectually. And so it was our mechanical engineering department head, who happened to be a woman, still is, and now she's Dean of Columbia Engineering. She went over, and it was like, what do you call it? It's, I want to say, I can't remember, it's like Noah's Ark, but a little larger. She took with her 2 or 3 women, someone who was gay, and 1 or 2 Jews, okay? No, I'm not kidding. And we paid their freight to go check it out and make sure that they could do this work. Now, you could still argue, and still many faculty hold their noses when they see us in Saudi Arabia. And I'll be honest with you, I should never say this in public because of my friends here. I had never visited. I'm a Middle East specialist. I had refused to go to Saudi Arabia because of the policies that I just abhor. I mean, I just don't. But I did go to launch this thing because that's what they pay me to do. And I thought, well, let me check it out myself. Look, I mean, is it perfect? It's nowhere near perfect. And what I worry about is that we, MIT, or any of you, think that we can change a country's culture or social policies. That's not what we should be doing. But if we can lift folks up and lift ourselves up at the same time, that's good. So every project we do in Saudi Arabia has to involve women engineers or architects in the segregated women's colleges, which exist, and there are plenty of women to work with, and we bring them to our campus. We try to cooperate with them when we can in Saudi Arabia. It's an experiment, but I can't tell you how it'll play out. But you asked the right question. I mean, it's very hard to stick with principles, and anyone who says they have a foreign policy, see how often you violate it if you have it. It's tough. I mean, if they're exciting problems, we will go do them.
Dr. Khoury, I'm Vijay from India. If you see last century, there were very few countries that were engaged in research and innovation, but this century you'll see a lot more emerging in most countries in the Asian region possibly, and in future in Africa. And they emerge and really ramp up so fast that by the time you realize that, we are not there in this country, they've already gone ahead to, to command a considerable amount of respect in the research world. So as a global university, such as MIT's and Cornell, I think the challenge is always, what do you choose and how do you go there, step in early itself, like the Carnegie Mellon did in India in terms of information technology, education, and research. So how do you strategize, this kind of engagement? And countries probably would need just 8 to 10 years of engagement to be part of this development process, and then the relevance is also lost after that.
Right. I mean, so if I got you right, one issue is if you don't stay the course, how will you see the kinds of mid to long-term results? And in the case of the IIT Kanpur, we were there, we helped to get it started, and BITS Pilani as well. And then there was no more funding for us, and we went away. And for about 20 years, we had very little to do with it, except we have faculty from these universities who went there, and we're delighted. I mean, that they're on our faculty today. So there's some connection to these institutions, but it's not the kind of tight relationship you're talking about. And that's what I said earlier. I mean, had we stayed the course, perhaps we would have more to show for what we're doing. And that may be a negative or a downside of the kind of strategy we've pursued. But we worry about a lot of entanglements, and what we really worry about, and maybe this is the engineering culture, and some of you probably are engineers in this room, is flexibility, being nimble. Opportunities come and I'm just a historian, I live in the past, I'm happiest in the past. I'm looking for records that tell me about the past. I'm like a lawyer, I believe in evidence, that kind of stuff. But I watch my engineering colleagues, and they're always looking for the next, where's the next horizon for them to get involved with? You know what and maybe I'll stop here, but our biggest problem, honestly, is we have great science at MIT. You have great science at Cornell. Some of you come from universities that have great basic science. It's not just great engineering or agriculture or the like. We can't get foreign governments to understand that if you really want to build world-class institutions, if you don't invest in basic science, which may have no long-term results or may in the long term produce some results, you're not going to be MIT or Cornell or any other institution. You just don't have a chance. But they are governments, and they live by what their taxpayers and their citizens or subjects say. To some extent, their subjects probably don't get much say, but the citizens do. They pay taxes, and they have to show returns on investment. They're interested in economic growth. They don't know what innovation is. I'm not sure we know what innovation is, but we do it. And so how do you transfer this without understanding that underlying innovation and invention is fundamental science, physics, biology, chemistry, and all the interdisciplinarity that connects these fields today with computer science, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one. And the other area that we always worry about is when we tell them, and I'm a social scientist, humanist type, you know, policy matters. You've got to think not just about, you know, what you're developing, producing, but how will you disseminate it? How will you distribute it? I mean, what is the organizational structure? And here are universities in the social sciences and the humanities, and believe me, even in the arts, especially in the arts, which are as creative and innovative as anything I've seen in engineering these days. They don't have any interest in us. They don't want to see us. They think we're a nightmare. Sometimes they think because there's something called political science, it means political revolution, and they don't want to hear about that. And I understand they're a little behind the times when, I mean, I don't know what political science is today either, but so that worries us as well. And it is mainly engineering and management that get the goodies. And so we also need a distributive process within the university to make sure that it's like affirmative action, that someone, you know, benefits. And that's why we start charging these premiums. Not easy to always get. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next panel, but
Thank you.
please join me in thanking Professor
you.
Khoury for opening up the discussion.